Welcome, another episode, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here with Rich Klein. We're doing another tribute episode for another fallen warrior, a guy that was a mainstay at a couple decades worth of nationals for sure, Ace Marchant. A very interesting guy. You can't judge the book by its cover. He was a very interesting and learned guy and a friend to both of us, but he followed the beat of his own drummer. But he's passed away now. We want to honor his memory. It's Ace or Horace Ace Marchant, Dr. Marchant. But thanks to our sponsors so that we can do this, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, all those Beckett entities, even shout out to Fat Packs with Eric. So in that sense, Eric, you are a sponsor of this show too. So thank you for that. Enjoyed having you on a while back. Also ComC, where Rich works, and Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, as well as Upper Deck, Topps, and Panini, great card companies. But today we're talking about a national dealer who passed away a couple years ago, maybe. Yeah. I remember, and he probably was in his early 70s?
Early 70s, late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah. He'd been a professor, but he'd been retired. I know when I'd see him, we'd talk about the joys and the consternation of being a college professor. I had been. He knew that. I knew he was. He wasn't in, I think he was in history or something, because I was in statistics, which is completely different. But both of them have to deal with tenure. If you want to be a professor at a university, you've got to go through this gauntlet that's gaining tenure. You've got to do publications. They're not just publications that you write and distribute. In most places, they have to be refereed by other scholars, other professors in the field who say that it's okay, it can be published. And that's very daunting, again, to have your work scrutinized by somebody who but Ace went through that, I went through that, and we had that shared struggle.
I think the peer editing is, you said it's a struggle, but it's also very illuminating because you have people that know as much, if not more than you a lot of times on the subject, reviewing your work. That's why I moved into baseball cards instead of statistics. Actually, I took the statistics knowledge with me, but there are actually, I probably had 1 million referees for the price guides when people look at it. And again, if they have constructive criticism, I have no problem with that. So, but Ace and I would bat that around. I rarely saw him except at the National. Did you see him? Yes, Ace did all the East Coast shows. So I would see him, especially in my dealing days up in the New York, New Jersey area. I saw him frequently. And Ace had an interesting dealing history. He started, like most of us, normal Topps, Bowman, and he evolved to basically cutting magazines.
Ephemera.
Paper stuff.
Yeah. He got into that was less crowded.
Yeah, he was the only one.
Smart guy.
Yeah, he was the only one at the show. So it didn't take a lot for him to have a good show. He would sell stuff, and everything was meticulously organized. And
he had no competition.
And he had no competition
for what he was doing. And when you have no competition, you have some price control. And I don't think he was a gouger.
He never was a gouger.
But he had a lot of stuff, and you weren't going to, and you were paying him because he made it available, something that you would find interesting at a price that didn't seem unfair.
No, he was very good. And the thing is, he always was a collector at heart. When he got sick the last few years of his life, we get emails from him probably once a month, once every 3 weeks. He'd be very active on eBay, finding all these weird cub items, and we would talk about these cub items he was interested in, and hey, go bid on that. Or no,
did he sell his Cub stuff, or was that where his collecting interest, and he sold the other stuff?
I think he ended up selling the other stuff. The Cubs became, I think, his true final collection.
Yeah.
Because he stopped dealing when he got sick. I remember I saw him one year at the National, and I made a comment about how much weight he lost and how good he looked, and he says, "Well, unfortunately, that's cancer." That was pretty blunt, but it was.
He had a very wry sense of humor, though.
Yes, he did.
I mean, he was a little bit of an intellectual, and he looked like a truck driver.
Right.
Or, to me, maybe that's not.
No, I get it. He was a big, burly guy.
But he had with a ponytail.
Yeah. And a beard. I mean, he looked like he would.
An unkempt beard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love Daisy.
But he had his look.
Yeah.
He had his concept of who he was, seemed to be comfortable in his skin. And like I said, he was the road less traveled. You can't judge a book by its cover. He was not enigmatic, but he just was, when you walk up to him and then you start talking, you'd have no idea where that conversation could go into something that would be really interesting. I think he must have been a big reader.
He was a huge reader. And we always talked about what books we were reading.
Yeah.
And he loved the fact that I read so much.
Oh, me too. We have that in common. But which, again, if you're a listener, regardless of what your age is, reading is good. And it doesn't have to be all fiction or nonfiction. It's not even what you read as much as the fact that you're reading. It's very broadening. But Ace was in our fraternity of readers.
When we're talking about Ace, and we'll do a separate episode about Gary Sawatsky and Jim Justice another point. But in a way, Ace was like Gary and Jim, in that Gary and Jim, if you saw them at the show, they had almost no real base cards after a while. Everything was oddball or weird. And
the Wizards of Odd.
The Wizards of Odd.
Yeah.
And before it was Jim, it was Dwayne Schrone that Gary worked with.
Right.
And I actually ran into them at a Yankee game in 1983 once. Which was that was a strange place to see two dealers from wherever they were living at the time, but they were up
Gary Sawatsky probably is possibly the last collection I bought before I started the price guides. And it wasn't a collection. I bought his table.
Yes.
At the end of a show.
Was he doing odd stuff at the time?
And he was doing odd stuff. And he was a piano mover. And so you wouldn't think he would be intimidated by lugging the residual cards that he didn't sell back to his van. I think they had a van. But for some reason, he said, "Hey, I can always get more cards, but I'd like to just go home empty-handed. Why don't you make me an offer for the whole thing?" And because there were some Clementi items in there that I thought, if I buy the whole thing, I might get, it'd be like I'd get the Clementi stuff for free. And they were 69 Supers.
Oh, good cards.
Yeah. So, it was, so I thought, I'm going to do okay on this. And so I did. But again, it was a willing buyer and a willing seller. And that was probably my last big collection before I kind of got into the price guide business.
And I bought a lot from Ace at every single show that I would see him at. He'd always put stuff aside for me. And there's one item he had that I'm still kicking myself for not getting. He had a magazine that had it was an ad with the original photo of Pee Wee Reese jumping over the guy.
The 53 Bowman pose?
53 Bowman pose, yes.
Oh, man.
Because that's like a magazine photo from like 1947 or 48.
Yeah.
It's not a photo they took for 53.
Not contemporaneous.
It's not contemporaneous.
Was he find Columbia stuff for you?
Yeah, he'd find some Columbia stuff for me, but he just
he had to be a trivia guy, kind of like we are,
right.
just kind of knowing these little tidbits. He was a generalist, but he must have known his customers.
But he'd find me stuff to read.
Yeah.
He always wanted to find me stuff to read. He'd actually quiz me about it. So I would actually read what he gave me because it was fascinating. So he actually liked to give me stuff to actually sit down and read. Yeah. I would pay for it. So when I say give me, it's not free. But.
Right, but still, that's nowadays you give somebody something to read, they act like, "Well, man, what are you doing to me? I got to read this."
Well, we both read so much on the internet, but you have a ton of books.
But I really, when I meet with a lot of people that are thinking about doing publishing ventures, and I'm just saying, you make it smaller. I talk to the publisher. It needs to be 300 pages to be taken seriously. I said, what's going to be taken seriously is a doorstop. If it's 100 pages or 150 pages, it's less intimidating. Just if you're a good writer, just get them into it. That's a good thing about the internet these days. You can get a free chapter of some of these things, and you get into that. I want to find out more. But I think Ace was old school. But if you're a reader and you're a lifelong learner, you're going to stay fresh.
And he did.
And I think he did.
He did, as I said, and it was great to see that even as sick as he was passionate about his Cubs collection. Yeah. And he would find these interesting items on eBay and ask me, and I'd say, "Oh, that price? Why not?"
Just for the listeners, there are going to be listeners here that we have that never met Ace. And like I said, if you walked by his table, he was unique. He was unique, but he's not there anymore. But if you live in the Midwest, you might say, "I thought his name was Paul Marchant."
Right, Paul.
But that's a different guy.
That's he was one of friend.
And he's from the St. Louis area and was one of the co-promoters of the third national that was in St. Louis, and was a well-known dealer, kind of wholesaler guy in the Midwest that I'd come across. Again, a completely different guy, a really interesting guy in his own right. He's the guy that bought out
the right to use the exhibit
supply company.
In 1980, he did all sorts of fun sets with it.
And he had all these small sets that he did and all this stuff. So anyway, I don't think they're even,
as far as I know, they were not related.
Well, he was like the Jack Sprat,
yes.
And he was very lean, and Ace was not.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. But again, great guys. Maybe they're distant cousins from way back. But Paul, I think, is doing well. So, but Ace had some decline at the end, and that's sad. When you don't see somebody at the National these days now, especially of the veterans, you wonder, what their situation is, whether they're in bad health or it's such a lifetime hobby. So maybe something about us doing these tributes. These are people that that stayed as long as they could, and they contributed, and they loved what they did. And it wasn't always their main thing in the case of Ace, but it was a really passionate side gig.
Okay, and I'm going to go to something. You host a weekly Bible study section, and I go to Torah study at my synagogue whenever I can on Saturday mornings. And, we have a saying in our Torah study that you actually die twice. Once when your physical life ends, and once when the last time somebody mentions your name. And to me, doing all these is keeping all the people alive, because we're mentioning their names and we're keeping their memories fresh.
Well, and I received that. I think that basically we live in a culture that values relationships. I'd like it if relationships were valued even more. And there's some breakdown of the family. I think that's tragic in some ways as well. But again, keeping the positive memories of somebody alive and making people aware of guys that are. I have a saying that when a baby is born, you want that baby, that child, to get the best of the dad and the best of the mom.
That's a really good saying.
And so, when in some situations they think, well, I got my dad's no good, my mom's no good. Well, wait a minute. In some ways your dad was really good. In some ways your mom was really good. Don't you want your kids to have the best of that? And in many cases, if they can approach it that way, they don't. And so we're approaching these tributes like that, is that we're not trying to we're not doing investigative journalism to figure out what, that Ace liked to smoke cigars or something. Right. We were just honoring him as a guy who did some really interesting things and was, and probably a little bit of a one-of-a-kind guy.
I think he definitely was a one-of-a-kind guy.
So I don't know every detail about his life, but I know that he greeted me warmly. He kind of warm and intellectual.
He was, yeah.
It was just different, because he was not the same.
And his wife trained animals. It was really, it was a really cool, she had a really cool thing she did. It was, I believe her name was Tibby, and it was an interesting thing she did too. So they were a really good couple. She did her thing and he did his thing.
Do you think he ever went to the barber?
Maybe once a year.
No, but what would they do?
Trim the beard a little?
I don't think so.
Okay. Maybe cut the hair a little?
Well, I don't know. It didn't look like it.
I know sadly when he got sick, obviously, the hair disappeared, but.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, he did it the way he lived life on his own terms. He obviously was very bright and created a business on the side that he could really enjoy. And
I think he enjoyed sharing it with everybody. And when we talked about Wayne Varner, it was the same thing. Yeah. We enjoyed sharing it with each other.
They had their niche, and they had the people they enjoyed being with. And like I say, Ace, miss you. Again, a fellow professor, even though I didn't hang in there as long as you did. It's an honorable profession, and he had an earned doctorate and was like I said, a very bright guy who brought some interest to the National every time I was there. I could count on some discussion that I wasn't counting on. And Rich, sounds like you had the same experience with one of the other hobby. He was a big guy, but he wasn't a giant, but he was a big, bulky guy. Bigger guy, yeah. So in that sense, a giant of the hobby. So let's end on that note. Ace, we miss you, and hope our listeners enjoyed our look back at another hobby icon that was a big part of the National for several decades. So again, thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Jim.
Talk to you all tomorrow.